Oh, yeah, that's good.
Like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's what I meant, sorry.
Because I know Rajas is pulmonologist. And he's on.
Okay, moving along as to why we do this, we established that it gives us a little bit better understanding of ourselves, a little bit better understanding perhaps of other people that are on our teams that we work with. But there's more to it than that. I think that this is a skill that if we can learn to read other people and what their temperament preferences are in their wiring, we can connect with them better, because we've seen through all the differences that we speak differently. We don't use the same language. We process things differently. So if I want somebody to understand me, I have two choices. I can speak my language and hope they translate what I want into the intent that I meant, or I can try to speak their language so I better am confident that I'm getting my point across the way I want it to be made. And so it's to my advantage to learn to speak other people's language, especially if they're my boss or a company that I need to make a decision to buy something from me or go with my proposal, or if it's maybe somebody I love, somebody I live with at home, and someone that I don't have the natural wiring that they have, so I don't process things the way they process things. And so if we want to coexist better, then it's better for us to learn each other's preferences in terms of how to speak the language, and how to present concepts and complex problems and how to deal with things. And if we are a parent or a multi-generational family, there's value there as well. Little tiny children, we say, don't have personalities. Bull. They totally have personalities, and if we think that we have something to do with that, we don't. And I mean, there's the age-old question of whether someone develops their temperament based on the environment that we prepare for them and raise them in, or the genetics that they are born with, the dynamic wiring that we have in terms of our mental processing and our emotional processing. And I think that we all realize that our children are born pre-wired with an awful lot of things, and the conditions that we raise them in impact that. So both answers have some influence on our children, but the temperament types start showing themselves when our children at a very young age, their preferences, especially the introvert-extrovert, for example. I knew on day one of kindergarten that my son James was going to struggle with being introverted. He's got very outgoing capabilities, but I watched him interact with a first day of school class in kindergarten, and I could see the introversion preferences just coming out in him. And he's this tall, you know, and so we witnessed that in the people around us. We witnessed that with the people in our house. And at some point in time, we become more solid in our preferences. We become more determined in our preferences. We become more predictable in our preferences. And then somewhere as we age, maybe we eventually become more moderate in our preferences. We start to see more things gray than black and white. And I think that's a life cycle scenario. But to complete this class, anyway, I want us to introduce to ourselves the concept of how do we speed read people, and kind of what kind of clues do they give us, and how can we benefit from that to learn to speak their language. So we'll test it a little bit with some of the temperaments that we have in the room, and we'll look at how those temperaments process things preferentially. Before we get there, just a few summary things about the combinations. There are many phrases that are associated with the various combinations. You see these in the handout that I gave you. But it's interesting to me, while generalities are rarely fair or actually rarely even 100% true, it's interesting if you pick out your 4 letters and look at the phrase that's associated with your 4 letters and go, is there any truth to that? And I look at the 2 that are associated most with me and I go, those are both somewhat true. I usually test as an ENTP. On occasion, I will test as an ENFP. And so those 2 are right here. The ENFP, anything's possible. That is 100% reflective of an attitude that I have. ENTP, the life's entrepreneurs, let's figure out a new way to do this. That's naturally in my wiring. So either one of those that I would test are a phrase that at least partly accurately describes me. And maybe as you look at yours, there may be some value there that you see that kind of validates who you are, and maybe it gives you a new motto. Maybe it gives you something that you can stand on and go, you know what, that is me. That is true for me. And so take that for what it's worth. Understand also that when we see these 16 temperaments mapped out as these are in the chart, this is the same order, these 2 slides, and the second slide is in color, showing groupings, saying that, so the red tendencies are all extroverts, they're all S's, all extrovert, all S's. So we've got FPs, we've got FJs, we've got TPs and TJs, but the ES is the same. There are no other ESs here. So the ES combination has some dominant effect on the personality, as does the IS, or as does the IN, or as does the EN. So those are kind of grouping quadrants that the psychologist will look at for whatever it's worth. It may give you a little bit more of an eye-opener about the neighboring temperament types that are close to you, or the grouping that you're a part of, based on this way of segregating them. You have a couple more of those drawn out in your handouts. I didn't want to talk to them, but I wanted to point them out. Another thing I wanted to point out, though, was that the distribution of how many of us there are. So if you look at the most common 4 letters together, the highest population is ISTJ. Now, we already learned that I's are not a high part, they're 25% of the population. And yet ISTJs are a very common, if you call any of that common, 10 to 14% is not a high percentage. 10 to 14% chance of winning isn't a very high chance. Russian roulette has a higher percentage than that, and that's Russian roulette. The lowest is the INFJ, being the rarest, not the lowest, the rarest of the combinations, and the rest of us are somewhere in 5 to 10% ish or less, give or take a little bit. But what that says is most people aren't wired like we are, right? No matter who you are or where you are on that chart, it would be safe to say that most people are different than I am. And that's either good news or bad news. I think it's good news because variety is the spice of innovation and spice of life, and we like variety and we need variety. We may not always like it, but we need variety. And so this disbursement is important. It's dated 2006. I have looked at this disbursement from 1955 to present, and it's always about the same. So people aren't trending in a wild way away from our core temperament distribution or temperament types. Another thing that may be interesting is not just how many of people like us are there. What's the difference between boys and girls? And there is a difference between boys and girls. but it's not as broad spectrum as you might think. And I will more specifically give you the difference. In this chart, I'm toggling back and forth. Females, males. So if we look at the ISTJ, there are fewer female ISTJs than there are male. If we look at the INFJ, there are more females than there are males. But not a lot. Overall, we've got the ESTJ in females 6 to 8%, and males 10 to 12%. That's a significant increase, but it's still not a big number. And so in most of these, we see roughly the same distribution between genders of the temperaments. A little increase, the ENTPs, 2 to 4% female, 3 to 7% male, 8 to 10% ENFPs in female, 5 to 7% less in males. So we see a little variety, but not huge variety. If we were to look at it a different way, this way, just by one letter at a time, the total disbursement in an E is 45 to 53% of the human population. There are actually more women, by a little bit on the higher end of that spread, than men that are E's. Because why? Men don't ever talk, right? We have a stereotype. The men are quiet. They're not going to tell you when they need to go to the doctor. Well, it's not. That's an I characteristics. More males are I's than female. Yeah, barely. But not. But it is. It is a piece of data that we can look at there. The place where it gets to be a bigger difference is between the T and the F. In the T and the F, females for a T, 24 to 35% of females are T's, 55 to 67% of males. That says males favor the thinker, either because they're naturally wired that way or they want to be. Females, 65 to 76% of females are feelers, 33 to 45% of males are feelers. There is a significant difference between the T and the F, male and female. And when I test kind of in the middle between those two, others do as well. That means that we have moments where we would try either, or we'd be comfortable with either way of processing data. And we would weigh in emotional factors as well as logical factors, and females tend to weigh more emotional factors, and that would fit with the stereotype, right? And it's unfair that stereotypes are there, but it does fit with that stereotype. And whether it's 100% solidly true, this is just data, and data is in broad strokes and broad numbers. All right, with that, we're going to move to speed reading. How do we tell what temperament someone is? This book is a reference book. It's been on the market for a while. It's not a newly published book. I have a copy of it in both hardback and in soft cover. So it's been around long enough and printed enough that the soft cover version is available. Not an expensive book like a textbook is. Written by a husband-wife combination, Paul and Barbara Teeger, psychologist in Boston. I think I told you the story of how this book came into play. An attorney friend of theirs was at dinner with them, said, I need to find out if my jury lends to be thinkers or feelers. If they're thinkers, I think my client will get convicted. If they're feelers, I think my client will get freed, potentially. Because of F's being more gray area, more laws than more situational circumstances than laws. And so he wanted to know if he could tell a T or an F with one question or two questions. And They said, absolutely you can. And so they set about teaching him how to select a jury that had the temperament that would be attractive to his client. So that book becomes not a book for attorneys, although he wrote it for that, or they wrote it for that. I've used it as just a broadening of my understanding. I've used it more as a sales training tool than anything else, because if you're in sales, whether it's all day, day-to-day, checkered coat used car salesman, or whether you are just presenting your ideas to your team, we're in sales of some sort, and how we get our ideas across, how we get our points across, and how often we are successful depends to a great degree how well we speak the language of the people that we are selling to. How well do we understand them? And if we don't understand them at all, I can tell you for sure, we screw up more deals than we mean to. And so I've used this book for that purpose. The book addresses a broader spectrum than we are going to talk about in class. It talks about how do you speed read people based on the truck they're driving or the car they're driving, or the clothes they're wearing, the color combinations they choose, the style of their hair. How do you tell, based on extraneous things like that? Somebody orders from the menu at a restaurant, you can read things about their temperament wiring that we're not going to go into in this class. But if you're intrigued about it, go into it. If you know somebody in your extended network that is a realtor, they need to read this book. There's a lot there that will help them in understanding how to connect a house to a human being with different temperament wiring, and how to stage a house for a specific customer that you're bringing to show the house to. And knowing that we can individualize our pitches specifically to the temperament of the person that we are trying to connect with is a valuable knowledge, and it's a valuable tool for us to use, and I would like us to try to explore that as much as we possibly can. So if we look at the letters by letter, the first letter that we would look at would be the E and the I, the extrovert and the introvert. Let's look at some things about extroverts. What do you see there? Taylor, read that to us.
High energy, talk a lot, and think out loud.
So we would tend to agree with that about extroverts, right? That if we see somebody that is just bouncing off the walls, they're either on meth or they're an extrovert, right? If they're talking all the time, they're either on meth or they're an extrovert, right? I understand that all kinds of medication changes our temperament to some degree. It can zone you out. Sickness can zone you out, not be medicine at all. Of course, the illegal smorgasbord of drugs further affects what wiring would be. We can't predict people's temperament. We've seen people get multiple tased and they're so high it doesn't affect them. And we go, what's going on inside? That's not the normal human being that we're talking about here. And we're not talking about temperament under the influence. That's not what this tool is designed to detect and do. However, under influence, most of the time our temperament stays rather true to who we are. If we talk a lot, we're an extrovert, we talk more. We have poor judgment if we are under an influence. The introverts, Elder, read that.
Quiet energy, talk less, reflective.
Okay, so if I'm trying to speed read somebody and I want to know, are they an E or are they an I? How can I go about doing that? So let's suppose that we're in an interview situation. I want to hire E's because we got a job that's going door to door selling vacuum cleaners in different neighborhoods, and we need extroverts to do that. Well, first of all, you don't need extroverts to do that. Anybody can do that. Introverts can do that. The problem with an introvert doing door-to-door vacuum cleaner sales is as the day wears on, their energy becomes less and less. They can do it, but they'll be tired quicker and they don't have a way of recharging because they have to get a loan to recharge, remember, from inside. The extrovert recharges by knocking on a new door, meeting somebody they haven't met before. So an extrovert is nicely placed for a job going door to door selling vacuum cleaners. So I want to detect if you are an extrovert. The easiest way I found to do that, other than obviously watching behavior, if you got a group of kids in playland at McDonald's, you pretty much can spot the introverts. They're all by themselves in the top in the cube, and the extroverts are throwing balls at everybody. And that's pretty much what's going on. So even as little kids, we can spot the extroverts and the introverts. In our world, all you need to do is ask a question. And it can pretty much be any question, because here's what happens. Extroverts hate silence. Silence is awkward to an extrovert, pretty much universal extrovert. If there's a quiet moment, they got to say something, because silence is awkward. Oh, I couldn't believe it. I got nothing to say. First date, nothing to talk about. Well, if she's an introvert, she doesn't want to talk. So stop it. Stop trying to fill up the conversation. Fill up the air with blah, 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 right? The extrovert will start answering your question. You ask a question. The extrovert will start answering your question before you have finished your question. They'll jump in immediately because they hate silence. They'll jump in immediately and start talking. And they will hope that by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they will know what they're going to say. Because they don't figure it out. They start talking. And then they're scrambling in their brain, piecing together the point they're about to make and what they're going to say, and hope it sounds good, but they didn't have that comfort or knowledge before they started talking. They start talking. So if I ask a question and there's a long, silent pause, there's eye contact, they heard me, but they're thinking about what they're going to say. That is an introvert. They won't start talking until they know what they are going to say, all the way to the end of the sentence, which by the way, I think is a plus, because it's well thought out. The extroverts are very rarely well thought out. They are good enough at talking that usually they pull it off, sort of, but it's not as deep or as meaningful a lot of times as the introvert's answer is. But all I'm looking for here, I'm not judging one versus the other. I'm simply looking at how much time did it take them to answer. If there was a pause, extroverts won't pause unless they're really stumped, or they thought you asked somebody else, in which case they were waiting to interrupt. But if there's an immediate answer to your question, go to the bank with the report that you got an E on your hands. If there's a pause, you've got that quiet energy preparing the right answer for your question, the kind of answer you deserve. And so that one is pretty straightforward and pretty obvious, isn't it? Do we kind of see that could be a way we could tell? We don't even have to do a lot of guessing. You simply ask a question and start your stopwatch. And if somebody interrupts you, it's an extrovert. Introverts don't interrupt. If they finish your sentence for you, it's an extrovert. Introverts don't do that. So there's a bunch of clues that we have available to us that will tell us or tip us off if we got an extrovert or an introvert. The one that we didn't talk about is this one. Extroverts, not only do they think out loud, they need to think out loud because they are getting energy from around them. So the thinking process is being fueled by your eye contact, your nod. You go, yeah, that may be, you're fueling on their thought process. And they're not telling you what they're about to do. They haven't decided what to do yet. They're just talking. They're not making plans. They're just talking. They're thinking out loud. And that drives introverts crazy because it's like, stop it. I thought we were going to go to that movie. No, I was just talking about the movie and who was in it and wondering about, blah, 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 blah. They were thinking out loud. They weren't making plans. Introverts want to make plans, not always. That's really more of a judger thing. But if we've got an introvert judger and ISTJ, if we've got that, they're all about that, and so the extrovert is making them crazy by thinking out loud. Understand that that's how an extrovert does want to process things, and if you've identified them as an extrovert, then you can go, well, let's just go off the record and let's just say, just suppose, what if? And now I can actually create a proposal that looks spontaneous, that is them thinking out loud, and they're doing two things. They're either jumping on board to my proposal while they're thinking out loud, or I am getting clues from them as to what they need to overcome in order to sell them. And so it's a win-win by them thinking out loud. The introverts who don't think out loud, I don't know where they stand. So from a perspective of trying to close them, I don't know what their objections are because they haven't told me yet. I have to pull them out. The extrovert's going to just lay them right out there without knowing they're laying them right out there. They're going to do that. So extrovert, introvert, I've kind of got it figured out so I can determine an extrovert, introvert. What's next is the S and N. So if I want to speed read the sensor versus the intuitive, let's look at some things that we know about the sensors. Ivan.
Simple language, literal, factual, past experience.
All right. So those are kind of bullet points, but they're interesting bullet points to me. Simple language. When I first saw that, I asked that as a question. For real? S's don't know big words? That's not true. But it is true that they use simple language. Versus, Melissa, the intuitives.
Complex language, figurative, vague, future possibilities.
Okay, so figurative and vague means they speak in broad strokes, kind of fuzzy about all the details because they don't know the details yet. The N's aren't interested in the details. It's the sensors that want to know the details. So the N isn't going to disclose the details necessarily, but there's a couple very interesting pieces on this versus this that help me in speed reading one versus the other. First of all, on the first item, simple language versus complex language. If I hear somebody describing anything with big convoluted logic paths and all of these gymnastics that they're going through grammatically, and they are trying to articulate some sort of a position, and we're just trying to keep up with what they're doing, and that's an intuitive. They used big words when they didn't have to use big words. And it's not that they're showing off. They're driven from something completely different than showing off their deep lexicon of language. They believe that the proper descriptor is the big word. And a simpler explanation is oversimplifying something. And to kind of drive this point home, the population is 75-25. Remember, you can bet on somebody being an S if you don't know. Place your bet that way just because the chances are better that they will be an S than an intuitive. But in med school, that's not the case. In med school, many, many more doctors are N's than are S's. Not sure what all the reasons for that is. The concept of intuitively diagnosing something that is wrong with a patient probably goes back thousands of years. And so the preference or the skill set is probably naturally developed along that, but I'm guessing at that. I don't know why it is, but I can prove that it is. Because how many times have you gone to the doctor, they've explained to you what is wrong with you, and you have no idea what they just said. Even if you go, slow down, hold on, I got to write this down. If you write it down, you're going to go home and look up every word. You're going to be on Google trying to figure out what's wrong with you. And what they said is your nose is running and you got a sore throat. But they didn't say it that way. They said it their way, which is the proper way of exactly what it is you have medically, the Latin word for it, because that's the accurate descriptor. A lesser descriptor doesn't accurately tell you. So they're not showing off their language, they're trying to accurately state it. Whereas the simple language person knows those big words too, especially if they're a doctor. Some of the doctors are S's, not as many, by quite a lot, not as many. But the S, they know the big words, but they see greater value in being understood. So they are driven by trying to speak the language that you understand. So they want to explain it in terms that make sense to you. And a doctor that takes the time to do that is rare, but we understand what they just said. And that's helpful for us as a patient. It also, we just diagnosed that they're an S. And so that helps us in speed reading, just listening to the size of words that the person that you're trying to read is using. If they are using simple language, they understand that it maybe takes more intelligence to describe a complex thing in simple words than to use the big words. You actually have to be smart to do that. And they understand that, they recognize that, and they put value in that. They put value in being understood, and I think I thank them for doing that. That's pretty awesome. Here's the way to tell, though. You can listen to the language that they're using, and if it's big words, they are tipping the hat that they are an N. If it's little words, they're tipping the hat that they're S, which is the probability anyway, 3 to 1, 3 to 4. 3 out of 4 are S's. But here's a way that I would go about doing it too, would be to say, tell me about your project. Tell me about your job. Tell me about something. And the S will always, I'm not listening to what they say to answer it. I'm listening for the tense that they place the answer in. Do they speak to me about the past, the present, or the future? What tense do they describe their project in? And S will almost always describe it in the present based on the past. They will say what they did, what they accomplished. They'll talk about what they got done last year. They'll talk about, and their resume will reflect that as well. It will talk about the stuff that's done. It's check marked, it's checked off. Or it's the stuff I'm absolutely, I finished it last night. It's what I'm working on today. It's the present, actual present. And you notice I left work, so that's done. Or I wouldn't be talking to you about it. The N is almost always going to answer me based on what they are doing currently and what it's going to be. So, we're working on this cool thing. It's going to be blah, 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 blah. And it's not something they've done yet. It's not a project that's finished. It's not what they did last year. It's something that they have yet to do. So they are talking in the future. And so if the answer is in the future tense, I'm talking to an intuitive every time. And if their answer is drawn on past experience, I'm talking to an S every time. So tell me about the project. And they'll say, well, this was an awesome project. We sent kids up to make a wish, and we raised the funds to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And it's awesome. The other one's saying, yeah, we're working with SwitchPoint. We're going to add, apartments for the homeless, and it's going to be cool. That's an N answer. That's an S answer. And they gave it away in the time frame of where their answer was. Because the S's are thinking I can't talk about tomorrow yet, because we haven't done it. And we might not ever finish that. We might not ever be able to pull that off. So they won't talk about that. They'll talk about what they have accomplished and what is done. So they told me, they tipped the hat, right? So far we got a fairly easy way to pick an E or an I. We got a fairly easy way to pick an S or an N out when we look at them. Now let's look at the thinkers and the feelers. Back to you, Taylor. What do the thinkers do?
Logical, analytical, and critique.
As opposed to the feelers.
Friendly, sensitive, appreciative.
All right, we already talked about the critiquing and the appreciating. We can use that as a detection tool in a minute. But before we get there, can we see something in facial body language. Look at the two pictures that are there. Is this dude a thinker or a feeler? I hate to say it, but he transmitted it without talking, didn't he? And he's even wearing a thing, but that's a professional status thing of what his qualifications are, proving it's a serious thing. It's a serious thing. But I can see the serious all over his face. And when he stops closing his eyes and having his chin, he'll still have that serious on his face, won't he? And we still would be able to see it. This wrinkle right here is probably going to always be with him. I don't know if there's enough Botox to pull that out. And plus, he's not going to use Botox anyway. What about over here? We got friendly, sensitive. These are just little kids and a dog, but they got friendly written all over them, right? And even the dog is friendly. We got a dog that's an F right there, and all dogs aren't Fs. You've met some that were thinkers, I think. So the friendly part, I would say, as we're trying to speed read somebody, go out on a limb a little bit and try to read body language. Because we haven't talked about body language yet. We will have a class on neuro-linguistic programming, and we will talk a bit about body language from a leadership point of view. The body language that we command and we reflect can be controlled, and it can be made better, and we can do some positive things with that. So we will talk about that in another class. But for right now, we have been reading body language. This isn't a mysterious black box. We've been reading body language all our life. When you stand up from the couch, the dog knows whether they're in trouble or going for a walk. They know. Without you saying a word, they read your facial expression, they read the way you stand up, they read your body language and the juxtapositioning of what you're doing relative to what, and this is the dog. If the dog can figure it out, we can figure out a lot. You can tell by the way a person is walking if they're stomping or they are in a pleasant little approach you mood. You can tell the way somebody walks towards you if they are stepping towards you to punch you out or to give you a hug. You can tell. We can tell. We've been reading those things all of our life. So read the friendly card for a moment as you watch somebody. Is it possible for us to misread that? Yes, it totally is. If their mind is somewhere else, if it's reflecting something that's going on in their world, they just got news that was not what they expected, or there's a lot of things that affect our appearance of friendly. But overall, we give it away of whether we are open or closed to another human being. And as we approach others, it reflects whether we are friendly or not. But I want to play on the card of speed reading. I don't want to rely on that. I will rely more on the last point on both sides there. I will ask a question that will give them an opportunity to be neutral or to lean one way or the other. I will say, maybe if it's an interview, I'll say, tell me about your boss. And they will critique or appreciate, whichever is their natural wiring. Tell me about the town you moved here from. They will critique or they will appreciate. Every time. And so they will always let you know, based on the content of their answer, whether their hardwired thinking is critiquing or appreciating. And you can evaluate yourself on that. If you are an F, which we have a few in the room, we have more than F in the room, as an F, you can think about the places that you have lived And while there is something bad about every place anyone could ever live, your first thoughts won't be that bad thing. It will be appreciating something that was awesome about that place that you lived before you came here. And that's kind of a little test if that's your natural reaction or not. If there's bad things about every human being, I mean weaknesses, and there's great things about every human being in strengths, and the appreciators will think about what is good about their boss, and the critiquers won't ever go there. They'll tell you what's wrong with their boss. They'll gauge it. They'll caution their words. Are we being recorded? Are you going to talk to them? Are you friends? I mean, they'll check out that it's safe to tell you what they think, but they will tell you what they think in a critiquing point of view. I have enough F in me that I said I test sometimes F and sometimes T. I have enough F in me that I have awesome things to say about everywhere I ever lived. Every house I ever lived in, there were features about that house that I thought were cool, even though some of them were, very small apartments that I lived in Chicago, in bad neighborhoods. But I won't tell you that part, because that's not what's top of my mind. Top of my mind is the cool things. The little old lady that lived upstairs, and a little old lady that lived downstairs. I lived in a 3-flat apartment at one point in time, and the cool things about those two women. And they were much older than me at that point in time. They were at end of life, and I was at college. And so, I think about those things that are people, those are F things. Those aren't T things. That's what comes to my mind about places that I have lived. And I will always talk to you about the cool things. I've never lived in a bad place in essence. And yet where I live now, I think is the best place of all. But if life takes me somewhere else, I'm sure there'll be cool things about where that is too. And as you travel, there's neat stuff about everywhere you go, isn't there? And if you are an F, you gather those things in. If you're a T, you talk about, I can't believe it, garbage people were on strike and there was garbage cans everywhere. I was on the same trip in the same town and I didn't notice that, because that wasn't what I was there to see. And I understood that. And so, whether we're natural, a thinker or a natural feeler, that's where we'll give it away. So we can speed read somebody based on how they critique or how they appreciate. And finally, the ones that drive us crazy, the judgers and the perceivers. Judgers, read to us about that.
Serious, decisive, deadline.
Yep. Versus.
Perceivers, playful, curious, wet deadline.
All right. So if I'm trying to, I'm doing an interview, and I'm interviewing somebody, and they're late for the interview. The J or a P?
J.
P.
They're a P. J's aren't ever going to be late. J's aren't ever going to be late. J's will be on time, or they'll kill themselves, or they will just want to kill themselves if they have to be late. It just hurts them inside if they can't be on time. And the P's, I wanted to be on time. I meant to be on time, but I was 10 minutes late to class today. Sorry about that. I really meant sorry about that. But I'm scheduled with the class till 3. So I come up with an excuse in another building. So I have an excuse, but it doesn't matter. A J would melt down about that and would tell college administration, you cannot schedule me on a class that ends at 3 and a class that starts at 3. That is not okay. You can't do that. P goes, well, all right, I'll leave that class early a few times and I'll be late a few times over here and we'll balance it out, and I hope everybody forgives me. That's a P response to that. If I walk into somebody's office, can we tell the serious from the playful by looking at their office? It's a professional place. It should all be serious. But the P's can't help themselves. There's going to be a Nerf basketball net above the trash can. There's going to be a dartboard. There's going to be something. There's going to be a hangman thing that swings back and forth. There's going to be something that tells the rest of the world, I'm really not this serious. But I got to be. It's my job. So they'll tip the hat. They'll tip it off. The curiosity of a person. If you're talking to somebody and they lose eye contact because they saw a squirrel, they're a P. J's won't let themselves see a squirrel. They won't shift focus away from your conversation, probably almost never, because that's not the way they're wired. That was an obvious distraction, they would think, and so they wouldn't do that. If we run up to somebody and we ask a question, and they give us, let me just ask, let me state this differently. How long will it take a judger to answer versus a perceiver to answer a given question? Who answers first?
Maybe perceivers.
No, the judger answers first. Decisive. They've got it. They will make a decision fast, and they will declare it, and they will answer it quickly, with authority, usually. The perceiver will go, well, that's an interesting question, and the perceiver will often see both sides, and will answer both sides of something, whereas the judger almost never will answer both sides of a topic. So, wow, I'm running out of time. We're going to have to do one thing next class that we're not going to do today that I wanted to do today, but that's all right. We'll get to it because perceivers aren't that good at managing the time. I did start 10 minutes late. So if I'm looking at a judge or perceiver, I'm going to base it mostly on how serious are they taking life, how quick are they answering questions, how prompt are they, how if they're late for the interview, they're not a judger, and I forgot something on thinkers feelers. This I got to say because enough people do this that this gives them away. If somebody, when you're talking to them, uses your name in the sentence, in the conversation, they are an F. T's don't use your name. It's not that they don't know your name. It's not that they don't care about your name. They know you know your name, and they know it's unnecessary for that conversation. The F's do it to try to connect. And sometimes F's are trained to do it, and salespeople are trained to use the people's names. Dale Carnegie says that's the most appreciated word a human being has is their name, so use it. And so some people are trained to use the name, and they use it not naturally. But if somebody's naturally talking to you and they use your name, they're an F. You don't need to go any further. They have declared who they are. All right. So I think we've kind of, let's test ourselves as we are done with class here. I'm going to leave you with an assignment, and we'll pick up class with that assignment. It's an easy assignment, but I want us to not skip it while we've got the continuity of what we're talking about. But to end up here, let's practice speed reading a few times. Let's look at Elvis. We know a little bit about Elvis's personality. Would you say he's an E or an I? Elvis was extroverted for sure. Was he simple language or complex language? Elvis used little words. Elvis didn't use big words when he talked to people, probably almost ever, unless it was in a lyric. But your blue suede shoes was about as complicated as he got, I think, talking to him. Thinker or feeler? Oh, yeah, all over feeler. Judger or perceiver? Playful as could be. We read Elvis, from the little we know of us, none of us met him, but we read Elvis as an ESFP, and I think that is correct. Let's look at this guy, Al Einstein. He's an I, big time. Drew from within. Intuitive or sensing? Intuitive. He was the guy that did theoretical math to the point that we go cross-eyed, right? He was intuitive in that way. Thinker or feeler? He was all over T, man. He was a thinker big time. Judger or a perceiver? Before you answer, he perceives some stuff, but he was not disciplined. Look at his hair. Okay, when we talk about styles that you can detect the way people dress, their hair, that is not a hairstyle of any J ever alive, unless they just got freshly electrocuted or something. That's a hairstyle of somebody that has no value in hairstyles. And that's the playful perceiver, cares about other stuff. So Albert Einstein was the INTP.
He even left high school, didn't
Yeah, he quit when he was 14 or something. Yeah, because he didn't need it. It was like, actually he did need it. He wasn't good at math yet. He had to get to himself to be good at math. Here we've got the first president, George Bush, and one would think all presidents of the United States have to be extroverts. They do not. Most have not been. More have not been than have been. He would be the first one not the first one. Let me scratch that altogether. He is one that is an introvert. So while he stood in front of the world, stood in front of the United Nations, stood in front of wherever he had to stand in front of, he gained his strength from within. He gained his strength on the ranch and by himself. Sensor or an intuitive. Remember, we are 3-1 in S's, and George Bush was a simple language person as opposed to complex language, although he had speech writers that knew big words, and he used them, but he valued the simplicity. The thinker or feeler. Oh, no, much a thinker. He was, remember, a businessman in the oil industry and, owned the Houston Astros or whatever, or the Texas Rangers, maybe it was, I don't know. He owned a team down there. You don't get that by being a slack businessman. But in typical leadership style, he has the power formula of leader. The ISTJs of this world are the rulers of the world. Those are our CEOs. Those are the people that pretty much run the world. I have some more that we will start class with. We'll speed read a few more people. But in the meantime, what I want you to do is I want you to go to page 42 and on through to page 47. There are these 16 pairs of letters that represent our temperament. And if the X, you got 2 that represent yours. And I want you to look yours up, find the page that it's on, and these bullet points are recommendations of how to speak your language. And when class starts, when we get together next class, we will drill into these and we'll find out, are they true? And how do I need to put a proposal together if I'm going to sell you? What are the elements of that proposal that we learn from this? Because we have 16 different proposals that need to be made. And if I'm making one from my company and you're the decision maker, I want to speak your language to tilt the odds as much in favor of me as I can. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks much. We're done. We are a few minutes past, but thank you very much. It's Wednesday, hump day, as we said. I hope you have a great rest of the week. And we will see you at 3 o'clock on Monday.
I'm sorry, will you repeat what we have to do?
Yeah. Yeah. Page 42 to page 47 are these pages that have black bars across the pages, and each one of those has 4 set of letters. Find yours. Read the bullets about yours and make an opinion of whether you think that's right or wrong. And we are going to then talk about that. All you got to do is find yours and read it. It's a 5-minute assignment, but I want you to come to class prepared for us to talk about how to speak your language. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.